Welcome to the Enlightened Life podcast with Alexandra Cousens. Together we'll demystify disease and the debates around health, empowering you toward real regeneration and a life of vibrant vitality.
So welcome once again to the Enlightened Life podcast. I'm your host, Alexandra Cousens, and I'm here with Geoff Palmer, one of my favorite guests. I've spoken to him many times, and the reason for it is because he is a 40-year vegan, and he is the owner of Clean Machine. So he really knows his stuff. He has been into bodybuilding, physical development, health for so many years. So I find, Geoff, you are such an inspiration. And I always love the posts that you put out. First of all, because you're not a 20 or 30-year-old, right? Can we reveal your age?
I am 61.
61, looking great muscle. There's nothing missing, but 40 years on a plant-based diet. Most people, of course, would go, well, that's not possible, and all the various blah-de-blahs. And so that's why we're talking to you today. And as always, I like to point out, it's not because we're trying to convert anyone. We want to put out the science. We want to set the record straight, because then you can make informed decisions. And that is what this, certainly this particular podcast is all about, but also my mission is, can we actually get correct information out? Because there is just so much misinformation, not just around plant-based living, but around so many things regarding health. So thank you for being here, Geoff. And yeah, let's dive in.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. I definitely enjoy your posts and podcasts as well. You've had some great guests on that, very intriguing ideas. I think it's important to be inclusive in the conversation because there's so many ideas out there. I see science as a tool for learning, because science is not a be-all, end-all. It doesn't reveal answers. It reveals deeper truths until something comes along better that replaces it. And that's the path of science. So I don't see science as a way to prove one person or one ideology correct. It's a process, not an endpoint. It's a process of unfolding and learning. We know so little that science is only giving us information. Now, what's important when we discuss science is to know that even though the science will reveal data, it's still up to the humans to interpret that data. And the interpretations, depending on what point of view you are holding, can vary dramatically. And we're going to talk about some of those different ways of viewing the same data in our discussion.
Right. Yes. This is a very important point to make. And I would say in my years of learning all about health, I've come to the conclusion, well, I only know what I know today. And there's always more to learn about, and to certainly be very, very inquisitive and discerning in terms of the science that we get presented, and to never just take anything sort of, on first view for the truth, but we need to really always dig deeper. And I also understand that for sort of the common consumer out there that just kind of wants to get move on with their lives, right? Like most people, they're just like, okay, just tell me what I need to do. I just want to be healthy and optimal and avoid disease and get on with life. And that is what makes it a little bit trickier, because most of the truth is not in full view. And so that's why we like to bring people like you on to shed a little bit of a deeper understanding in terms of all of these myths. So let's maybe let's pick some. Like, what are your favorite myths that get thrown around in terms of not being able to thrive on a plant-based diet?
Let's jump into one of the big ones, because there's been a lot of great research on it more recently, which is heme iron. So heme iron is only found in animal flesh. That's fish, chicken, any animal, beef, cow, lamb, doesn't matter. Heme iron is what makes our hemoglobin, our blood, right? It's what's found in our blood and helps carry oxygen. Well, it has an affinity for oxygen. And a free heme iron binds to oxygen. What is free heme iron and why is it different than plant iron? Well, plants actually bind an antioxidant to their iron. One of the powerful antioxidants they bind to it is phytate or phytic acid. The science community calls it IP6, inositol hexaphosphate. So it's a really powerful antioxidant that prevents that iron in plants from ever oxidizing. Now, they used to think, hey, wait a minute, heme iron absorbs much faster and much more readily than plant-based iron, so plant-based iron is a poor source of iron. What we now know is the opposite is true. That was true, but that's a bad thing, because too much iron can get into the bloodstream too rapidly and begin to oxidize. We now actually have a term for this. It's called ferroptosis. And ferro meaning iron and optosis meaning cell death. It's meaning that iron oxidizing can kill cells in our body, including the beta cells that produce insulin. And when it does this, it destroys the ability for the body to produce insulin, yielding type 2 diabetes. So we now know there's a direct link between eating meat, especially red meat, but all animal flesh, and type 2 diabetes causation. So all this focus has been on the sugar, and the sugar was never really the problem. That was an endpoint. Once you have insulin resistance, either you're not producing sufficient amount of insulin, or that there is the receptor sites for insulin at the cells aren't able to receive that. That's called insulin desensitization. Well, heme iron causes both. It disrupts the cells internally, the muscle cells where the receptor sites for insulin are, so that the receptor sites shut down. So that is insulin resistance. That is the hallmark of type 2 diabetes. And then it also damages the beta cells in the pancreas, which produce insulin, therefore leading to, in more potent cases, type 1 diabetes, but can also contribute to type 2 diabetes. Basically, you're not producing enough insulin to shuttle that sugar into the cells. So it's not the sugar that's causing it. Sugar exacerbates a bad problem already. So once you have type 2 diabetes, you do have to monitor your sugar levels, because it can't get into cells, because you've already destroyed its ability to get into cells through the heme iron causing the insulin's insensitivity and destroying the beta cells that produce the insulin. So you're getting it on both ends of the spectrum and the causal. Now, so they said, all right, well, our body has a mechanism to try to prevent that. Our liver produces a really cool chemical called hepcidin. Hep meaning hepatic, which is our liver. It's produced by the liver. When the liver senses there's too much heme iron getting into our bloodstream, it shoots out this hepcidin and blocks that heme iron from entering our bloodstream from the gut. Okay, initially that would be a good thing. If you were eating just one meal of meat, not a big problem. It blocks that heme iron from getting in and regulates it. It can block it for 24 to 36 hours. It can basically shut down the absorption of heme iron. Well, that's a bad thing if you keep eating more and more heme iron from animal meats. Bacon and eggs for breakfast, a hamburger for lunch, and a steak for... Now you keep this heme iron going through, and the body's already saying, stop, don't let any more heme iron in. So what happens? That heme iron starts to build up in our colon. We now know that heme iron causes colorectal cancer. It is not up for debate. We know there's 3 different pathways that it can cause colorectal cancer. So back to the plant iron. All right, that plant iron is bound to IP6. That protects it from oxidizing. Now, we used to say, oh, not much of it is absorbed. It's because the body has sufficient amounts of stores of iron. When the body needs iron, it sends a cell signal through the intestinal walls to our microbiota to say, go break off that IP6 and release the iron when I need it. So there is a direct communication between our own physical cells telling our microbiome when we need more iron. So it's not that it's not giving enough iron. It's giving exactly the right amount of the iron that our body is asking for and needs only. The rest of it stays bound to an antioxidant to protect it from oxidizing and damaging our cells. Now, that would be cool enough on its own, but that IP6 that breaks off and then the iron is absorbed, that IP6 can go attach to a cancer cell and destroy it. What's even better, it can protect the cells so they don't get cancer to begin with. And thirdly, that IP6 can get absorbed into a cancer cell and repair its genes so that it reverses a cancer cell back to a normal, healthy cell. There's no drug on this planet that can reverse cancer. And yet IP6, which is prevalent in beans and grains and greens, can do this every single day of our life if we consume enough. So this whole idea that phytates are bad, oh my God, no. They're not only not bad, they're protecting us from injury of the iron, and then they're actually reversing cancer cells that is caused by the heme iron in animal products. We had it completely backwards. So this is how you see the assumptions. Oh, look, heme iron gets absorbed so much better. It's faster, it's better. No, faster is worse. The way the plants have it, it protects it from oxidizing and regulates exactly how much so that you don't get too much iron, and then reverses cancer cells when they happen. It's a beautiful system. But we misinterpreted the data. We had the data that heme iron does absorb faster. We thought that was better. We thought this is why eating animal products was better and that plants were insufficient iron sources. Now we know the exact opposite is true.
Wow, this is fascinating. I had seen, of course, your post about this, and yes, to see it or to even hear it explained so well, the way as you explain it, it's kind of like, okay, super, super clear. And I feel so often these misinterpretations. I was trying to think of other examples because I've seen this exact same pattern happen so often, right? Where we think the problem is over here, and we only look at the micro happening instead of zooming out and going like, well, hang on, right? Like why is something happening? I kind of think it's the same thing. People have backaches and they think that the backache has to do with the back, right? Whereas most backaches really are to do with an overacidic diet, therefore an overacidic system, and everything that goes along with that, et cetera, et cetera. And that goes for bulging discs and all of these things that people go to chiropractors for and think that they are physical problems. They are actually problems of biochemistry that's happening in their body. And so I think similarly what you're explaining is that we misinterpret, as you say, we misinterpret data, but also we don't zoom out enough. And now, of course, I mean, this is going to be a very interesting conversation. So because as I have gotten deeper and deeper into genomics, and we were talking about this just before I hit record, is that, yes, I do see that some people need some, let's say, nutrients that are classically only found in or believed to be found and met through the eating of animal products. Yes. However, and so we want to address that. However, what I am yet to see in, now the many months that I've been looking into genomics, working with genomics, it's close to a year now. So I have not seen yet one client where I could outright say, you should be a carnivore. Or even close to it, or even say, you know what, you should eat a heavy animal-based diet. No, what I have seen is that most of us need actually a very heavy plant-based diet, some a little bit more green, some need a little bit more starches, but that ultimately the quantity of animal products that most of us actually need is very little. But now that brings me to another point, because what I often see in the genomic profiles is some people have quite a higher need for protein. And what we were saying earlier is that some people have more impaired pathways, for example, in terms of getting vitamin A from plant sources. And so we could leave it, well, genomics leaves it at that and goes, well, there's impaired pathways, therefore you need to get it from animal sources.
Right.
Whereas for my background in natural hygiene and detoxification, and of course, which is a shared background, you have the same background, that tells us, well, actually, chances are you have not cleaned up your body deep enough, because there is genetic buildup, basically genetic predisposition, genetic buildup. And by cleaning up the body deeper through deep cellular detoxification, you are going to be able to get your sources from plant-based sources rather than animal sources. So I would like your thoughts on that. On the other hand, genomics tells us that even though we can affect our gene switches, we can affect our gene expression through our epigenetics, but that our genes, strictly speaking, will not change no matter how much cleanup or detox or whatever we do. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, good that you brought up vitamin A, because that's one of the things that I get. So there's a difference between preformed vitamin A or endogenously, that's formed inside of our body. So preformed means it's formed by an animal, like us. We're an animal. We form it too, from the consumption of beta carotene. Since most of the animals we consume, like cows, they eat plants and they make vitamin A, and then they make it from the beta carotene that comes from the grass they eat. So when people say, or vitamin A, or let's talk about vitamin K2 as well. We can kind of tie them both in together. So obviously an animal can convert vitamin K2 and have more vitamin K2. Plants don't make vitamin K2, and plants don't make vitamin A. So that's a part of the truth. But the part that they're missing is the endogenous conversion from precursors. So we, like every other herbivore on this planet, can take beta carotene from dark greens and vegetables and etc., even fruits like mangoes are high in beta carotene. We can take that beta carotene and convert it. Now, the original studies said, okay, if that's the case, instead of getting the preformed vitamin A from the animals, we're consuming a lot of beta carotene, but how much of it is actually converted? So they looked in the digestive tract and they found that the enzymes, the gene, speaking of genetics, the gene only produced a certain amount of enzymes to convert that beta carotene to vitamin A in our guts. And it was only about 10% of what our body required. And they said, see, plants aren't sufficient. Beta carotene is not as sufficient because the conversion is so low. Now we know that is not where the conversion happens. That is just one step for immediate use by the body. So our body takes beta carotene and stores it in our skin. Why? Because beta carotene acts as a natural internal damage control device for sunlight. It's an internal sunscreen. So it protects us from UV radiation by absorbing that radiation and preventing damage to our cells. So we store beta carotene. The more greens, the more fruits and vegetables that you eat, the higher amount of beta carotene, the lower your risk for skin cancer. Boom. So they said, well, all this beta carotene being stored in the skin, let's measure how much is being converted to vitamin A in the skin. 10 to 20 times more vitamin A is converted directly in the skin when we need it. So the body can take, like when you have excess money, what do? You store it in the bank because it's nice and safe there. When we have excess beta carotene, we store it in our skin because it actually serves as a dual positive effect. And then you only take that money out when you need it. You don't withdraw all your money at once because you're not going to spend it. You only take out what you need to spend. Our body only converts that beta carotene that we need. So it's interesting. They did a study to say, well, if that's the case, what if we depleted people from vitamin A? What would happen? What happened is the amount of conversion in the gut went from 10% up to 80%. So it wasn't genetically determining how much. It's the genetics were setting the rate for conversion that was appropriate for our body. We only need 10% to top up our stores. Cool, we'll only convert 10%. As a matter of fact, if you saturate the body with beta carotene, your gut conversion rate can drop down to 0. Your body says, no, we got enough beta carotene. We got enough vitamin A. Don't need any more. Plenty of beta carotene to back it up. So we're backing up our vitamin A supply, but keeping it in a non-toxic form. Vitamin A can be hepatotoxic, toxic to the liver. So if you're consuming a lot of high vitamin A content and it's preformed, you can actually damage the liver because it's a toxin. This is why our body is designed to consume beta carotene, so we can store it in its safe precursor form, protect our skin from sun radiation, and then only convert it just as much as we need it, safely, only to the vitamin A that our body actually needs at that time. For each individual, for each gender, for each age, for each ethnicity, they all have varying requirements. So our body endogenously regulates this by keeping it in a precursor form and then only converting as needs to prevent liver toxicity. It's a beautiful system. But do you see how we got this so wrong? We were looking at people that already had saturation and looking in the wrong place. The conversion doesn't happen in the gut majorly unless you're deficient, then a lot of it can happen. It's not because the genes don't produce enough of the enzyme. It's because the genes didn't need to produce enough of any more of that enzyme because the conversion was not needed. As soon as you deplete the body, that gene starts producing a lot more of the enzyme. But we were only looking at people that were already had sufficient states of vitamin A buildup and vitamin carotene buildup in their bodies. So of course that conversion rate would be low, but we misinterpreted that data. It was the correct data, it was the wrong interpretation. Now we know a whole different story about beta carotene. Vitamin K2, similar. So we say, oh, vitamin K1 is made by plants. You know, we need 50% vitamin K1 and 50% vitamin K2. Well, if you look at plants, like 200 calories worth of kale will provide about 1,900% of your vitamin K1. So 19 times more than your body can even use in a day. So 70% of, regardless of your dietary preference, unless you're eating just only animal products, 70% of everybody's vitamin K comes from plants, all right? Then what happens? Well, the vitamin K goes into our gut, and we have specific sets of microbiota that live in our gut that convert that vitamin K1 into vitamin K2. So it's not that we need to consume vitamin K2. We don't. There is zero nutritional requirement as long as we're consuming enough vitamin K1 and we have a healthy microbiome. Now, there's a lot of people with really unhealthy microbiomes. So they did an interesting study, the NANES study, which is on all the nurses, 80,000 people in this study. They found out who had the lowest rates of vitamin K2. And it didn't respond to dietary patterns. As a matter of fact, those on a plant-based diet actually had higher levels of vitamin K2. The only time they saw low is they asked the nurses, had they recently taken antibiotics? So when you take antibiotics, what happens? It wipes out your good bacteria in your gut too, including killing off the bacteria that convert vitamin K1 to K2. So after a round of antibiotics, general antibiotics, you can drop your K2 levels by 75% in one dose.
Yeah.
That's because you're killing off the bacteria that actually do the conversion of vitamin K1 to K2. This is the pathway. Vitamin K1 all day long, vitamin K2 only in the conversion rate. So again, you don't have to get it preformed in animals, because what happens? The animal's guts do the same thing. They eat vitamin K1 and it converts to it. It's funny, the supplement vitamin K2 that you can find, what is it made from? Fermented soybean. So they took a plant, they add it to the bacteria that's in our gut, and just do the fermentation outside on the plant instead of inside in our gut. The same fermentation process is happening, and then they sell it to you as a supplement. So if you're a healthy vegan with a healthy microbiome, eating greens on a regular basis, there's probably no need whatsoever for you to consume vitamin K2. So again, we're taking a look at studies that are looking only at people who are unhealthy or on an animal-based diet, and then making assumptions based on the data that somehow that's because of something else. And when we really drill down and we see what's happening in the whole body physiology, it paints this beautiful story that our body has adapted over hundreds of thousands of years to getting all the nutrients we need from plants. It's all there.
It's wild. So what's going through my mind, which again I know from my background, and you know it too. So in essence, what you and I are saying is that most people, because of generations of degeneration,
Yes.
including the degeneration that's happened in our own body, right? So we know most of us, in an ideal world and reality, we would all need a lot of detox, a lot of regeneration. And, you've done it, I've done it for years. So we need a lot of that in order to then slowly really rebuild our health basically from the ground up. Like, let's also tell the truth, talk straight talk, right? And this is where, when I realized this a couple of years ago, like fully kind of where I went, okay, you know what? Here you are trying to tell everyone needs to detox, be on raw foods, do juice fast, clean their colon, clean their liver, all the things that take time, right? I mean, it took me 3 years. I know you also went through your period of being a fruitarian when you were way younger. So, I mean, you go way back. And I took 3 years out of my time when I was 40. So that was 10 years ago. And all I did for 3 years was detox, fast. And when I say fast, not a little bit, but 40 days at a time for 7 rounds. I went deep. And that is what it took to really regenerate myself from being bedridden and basically never really in my lifetime experiencing great health, to experiencing a level of health where I go, oh, well, actually, it's quite nice to be alive in a body.
Yes.
Like I literally was like, now I know what other people are talking about, because up until that, I like life in a body was kind of like, I actually don't see what the big deal is. So the point that so what eventually became clear to me is, and that was really my dilemma, and I think you're the perfect person to kind of like discuss this with, because most people don't get it. So my dilemma was, how can I help all of these people that come to me that aren't getting helped by the medical system, when I know that there is no quick fix, right? Because the only way to really totally transform their health is if they were to go through several years of detoxification, of fasting, and all the things that we have done. And that is where I kind of came at a real, really existential crossroad within myself, where I was like, okay, you want to help people. Most people don't have the time, the finances, the consciousness to actually go, you know what, I'm going to put my life on hold. I need to do this, right? And let's be clear also, not everyone needs to put their life on hold, because I always say my husband, he was working full-time in a corporate job, and he did it alongside me because he wasn't sick. So he just did all of the work alongside me while I was recuperating from being bedridden. So it can be done, right? Like it can be done, but it takes the level of consciousness to do it. So that is the point where, and this was really around, 2020, when the whole thing happened, when what happened, and where I came to this existential crisis, and I was like, okay, I need to find a better way to help people where I don't need to take them so deep into detox for years and years, but where I am also not giving them, the typical medical system band-aids or the functional medicine BS. And so I feel like with genomics, I found sort of a middle of the road, because most of the genomic profiles will tell you you need to be on a high plant-based diet, and then maybe you need to include some animal products. And even if we need a high protein diet, well, we can get a ton of protein from our legumes. We can get some protein by combining legumes, vegetables, and whole grains. So it's not like we all need to eat all of this amount of meat. And I kind of want to, what you're sharing is really helping me to lay this out. And I think this is a really important sort of next step of laying health out for people, right? Because what we're saying is, you can either go deep into detox and regeneration and just make peace with the fact that, yes, it's going to take you several years, right? Like it took us several years. Big deal. Now we are experiencing great health. Or if for whatever reason, because of consciousness, because of whatever, oftentimes life is stressful and we can't make that commitment to ourselves, right? Trauma, a lot of things, like I also want to be realistic, a lot of things can get in the way of us taking full, deep care of ourselves. So then we're saying, then you need to then utilize what science tells you. But then we want to tell people, know that you're not working with the full aspect of truth. You're compromising, and you're doing the best you can under the circumstances.
Yes.
Is that laid out well?
Yeah, and vitamin D3 is a good example of that. We have removed the human being from direct daily sunlight exposure. And there's some good reasons for that and some not so good reasons for that. We see an inverse relationship between depression and exposure to sunlight. We see, an inverse relationship with not getting enough sunlight and some disease state causation, especially immune health. During COVID, I was diving deep into the vitamin D3. So we've removed the human being and put us indoors. We work indoors. We stay indoors pretty much most of our day with very minimal exposure, maybe a little on the weekend, go to the beach or sit out by the pool or whatever, but that's not enough. every species was born to get regular daily exposure, with the exception of cloudy days. But even in cloudy days, the sun gets through and we get exposure. And that is a difference. So we've also removed B12 from our soil through modern farming practices. We've removed fungi from our soil, which enriches the plants and their nutrient content. We've removed B12 from our water supply. That's actually a good thing. We've ended dysentery, which was, the pollution of the water that was killing a lot of people and still kills a lot of people in third world countries. So there's good reasons for us doing that, protecting against skin cancer, yes. But if we're going to remove the human from access to vitamin B12 in our food supply and our water supply, from access to vitamin D3 from our sunlight, well, then we need to put it back. We can't fool ourselves and just say, I'm good. No, that's not how the body works. It has requirements. And if you're not meeting those requirements, you can get into deficiencies. Really great research on vitamin D3 with COVID. This holds true actually with all viruses. So vitamin D3 acts as a precursor to a really cool immunoglobulin that actually then attaches to viruses, destroys the outer shell of the virus, injects itself into, it's called cathelicidin. If you want to look it up, it's CATHLECIDIN, cathelicidin. So vitamin D3 and fiber upregulate our body's cathelicidin production. So they found that taking roughly 4,000 IUs of vitamin D3 greatly improved our production of cathelicidin, which greatly decimated the population of virus in our bodies and protected us from it. It's funny, cathelicidin works by attaching to the outside of the virus and going in and scrambling their mRNA. Interesting method, huh? Changing the mRNA vaccines. Interesting. I wonder where they got that from. They got that from our own immune cells.
Wow.
And some of the best drugs are just copying what the human body does when it has nutrition sufficiency. So they showed those with deficiency or insufficiency had a much greater death rate from COVID than those who had sufficiency or even proficiency, having more than enough. The fiber in itself also does this, and it does this through our digestion of fiber, converting into short-chain fatty acids like butyrate and propionate, acetate. So these short-chain fatty acids then stimulate our own immune cells to produce even more cathelicidin. So sunlight and whole plant foods, boom, protecting us against immune dysfunction and, of course, being harmed or disabled from viruses. We see this over and over again, that we've removed these things from our body's ability to have sufficient sources. We need to put them back. Either getting exposure to direct sunlight. I know most people work 5 days a week, 9 to 5, so they're just not able to. So take a vitamin D3 supplement. I mean, that's a real easy way to replace something that we've removed through modern farming practices or modern living practices. Farming has removed the vitamin B12 from our food. It's an interesting study on vitamin B12. They know that certain plants can absorb vitamin B12 from the bacteria that's in the soil. And then it goes actually up into the plant, it's still bioactive, but it's such a small amount. Well, they said, well, wait a minute. What if we enrich the soil, put lots of bacteria and lots of fungi in there? It's called nutrient bathing into the soil. And when they enriched that, they found the vitamin B12 content in the plants, food plants that we eat, went up dramatically. So if we were eating in nature with soil that is microbial and fungal rich, we would probably be getting all the B12 that we need from the actual plants. Now, it's interesting. I'm about to launch a plant called mankai. It's duckweed. That's the brand name for duckweed. So duckweed has a unique relationship with this B12 producing bacteria, where plants are in the soil. This plant floats around in water. So its root system is in water. Now, the bacteria in the soil actually break apart the soil and make the nutrients in the soil more accessible to the plant. And in return, the plant actually shoots amino acids and sugars down its root system to feed the bacteria. So the bacteria feed the plant and the plant feeds the bacteria. Nice little symbiotic relationship. But water plants floating around in water can't do that. So this duckweed actually takes the bacteria that it needs to help this conversion process and pulls it up into its root system and then makes these little nodules, little condos for the bacteria to live in inside of its root system. And then the plant can pull up the nutrients, the bacteria can break it down, and the plant can feed the bacteria. It's another symbiotic relationship, except now it's mobile. It can float around the water and still have this. So this allows that plant, when you harvest the whole plant and consume it, to provide over 100% of all the vitamin B12 that your body needs, because the bacteria is living inside the plant itself. So
I love
it's
that. That's fabulous.
Amazing symbiotic relationship. Again, we've taken the plants out of their natural relationship with the soil, the bacteria, and the fungi, the mycelium that are growing in there. And because we put it in soil that is depleted of bacteria, depleted of nutrients, we're not eating the same food anymore. We're not eating B12 rich or nutrient rich or vitamin rich or mineral rich foods. So we do need to take that into consideration. But it's not the fault of the plants. It's the fault of the humans for changing that.
Yes, and I think this is what I really want to come back to over and over, that in many ways the healthcare system that we have today, the supplement system that we have today, the food system, it's all in response to how humans have messed nature up, basically.
100%.
I mean, it's actually it's spectacularly ridiculous, right? Like once we really get it, we go, I mean, we are continuously shooting ourselves in the foot. We've done it for centuries. And it's not like because there's more science and more knowledge and more advancement, we should be getting smarter, but we're not, right? We're not getting smarter at all. In fact, we are moving. So this is what I find genuinely interesting, is that we are moving more and more into, basically a necessity for transhumanism, right? Like we're making it a necessity. And I'm kind of watching that and going, really? Why not? With all the advancements, we should make the switch and go the other way and go, okay, let's make nature king, right? Let's bow to nature because it can give us everything. And let's recreate life for all of us in a way that nature is our king. But no, mankind is gang ho, on doing the exact opposite. And this is really the point that I want to drive home into people's consciousness more and more. Because for me at this stage, it's not about, like veganism or carnivore or which one is right. It's like, yes, of course, when you are deeply compromised for generations and then you've compromised yourself for many, many years, are you going to thrive on a plant-based diet with a lot of detox? Probably not. You're going to do yourself in. But is that because of a plant-based diet, or is it because you are genetically and epigenetically so compromised that you simply can't deal with true health and aliveness trying to run through your body? And so this is the shift in consciousness that's needed, right? Because otherwise we're constantly trying to pull someone into a direction when the science, we can all throw enough science on each side and go, oh, but look, there's enough science confirming that we can thrive on, right? And it's like, no, it's beyond that. The conversation that we need to have really is, beyond that. It's to see, sure, many people now, we are thriving with transhumanistic consciousness and pharma and all of that, and I include all the latest sort of longevity discoveries. And yes, it's fascinating. Or we can go, wow, or we can set our lives up in a way that we make room for deep cellular regeneration. And that is what we transmit, hopefully, in a couple of generations' time. That is what we're going to transmit, and we're going to create a new kind of humanity. I'm at the point where, because this was really my huge sort of awakening and crisis. What did I say earlier? I said my existential crisis around 2020, when I realized, whoa, I thought that we were a little bit further along the evolution of consciousness, but actually we're not. And that was deeply demoralizing for me. I mean, at a level, maybe you can empathize. I've actually heard many other people kind of go, yep, I know exactly what you mean. And I'm now at the level where, in all honesty, it's like, is there actually any real hope for humanity? I mean, there's a lot of people like you and I doing amazing work and having the right consciousness, but we're the freaking minority.
Mm-hmm. I had this dream once that aliens came down to Earth, and they were exploding bombs, but nothing was being destroyed. And then I saw people running around screaming in pain, saying they're killing us, but I didn't feel anything. And so one of the aliens appeared to me, and I said, why are you killing people? He said, we're not. The people are killing themselves. We just came down to accelerate the process because you're killing yourself too slowly. And you're destroying everything else in the process. You're destroying other humans, you're destroying the planet, and you're destroying all the animals. So we're just here to accelerate your own death rate since you're killing yourself anyway. And I said, well, how come I'm not dying? He goes, because you're not choosing to cause your own demise. You're eating healthy, you're exercising, and you're doing the right things because what you're doing is promoting life. So we're just accelerating and amplifying your own choices. And I look around and I see that. When I see the research saying that 20-year-olds are dying from colorectal cancer, something that people only in their 60s got when I was young, and now not only getting it, but dying from it at 20 years of age, we are accelerating our path to death by our choices. Yep. And it's all mindset. It's all I know better. It's all the I, me, mine stuff. It's all that rugged individualism. I'm the only one that cares. We even have in the United States, a particular person that cares almost entirely only about himself. And we see this fomenting in people. They care about nobody else. They care about no other animal. They don't care about the planet that is supporting the life. It's all dispensable for whatever their personal needs are. That whole thinking has got us into allopathic medicine. We'll just take a drug to get our outcome, the one we think is right. Not listening to the body to say, what is the wisdom of the body? What does the body really want? Let's help it, support it, do what it wants, We're not looking at nature and saying, hey, how can we grow these foods that actually helps nature, that nurtures the soil, that replenishes the soil, that doesn't cause destruction? We're not seeing ourselves as part of a matrix, part of a integrated system. We need to start systemic thinking. Our whole body is a system. Can you imagine your heart cells saying, nah, I don't want to beat today. That's not my thing. Your heart would shut down. No, every heart cell agrees we have a purpose and we're going to do this for the better of the whole. Oh my God, did he just sound communist or Marxist? No, that's the way our cells work. That's how every cellular structure of every species on this planet works. It works in a cooperative. It works in a system. We need to start behaving and thinking that way, or we're going to drive ourselves down. What do we call a cell that starts behaving on its own instead of behaving like a system? A cancer cell. And it's destructive, and it can kill the entire being. That's what we're behaving like in our society, a cancer cell. I'm only out to feed me, to get what I want, to take what I want. It's all about the self. That's exactly the behavior of a cancer cell in our human body. And that's why we're seeing cancer rates skyrocket in human beings. Cardiovascular disease is still the #1 cause of death, but it's starting to come down slightly, and cancer rates will overtake cardiovascular disease as the #1 cause of death globally in humans within the next 5 to 10 years by most estimates. This is what we're doing. We're behaving like a cancer to our environment, to the animals, and to our own bodies by what we're choosing selfishly. And we're causing our own cancer. We're causing our own death, just like the aliens. We're accelerating our own demise. And we have a choice to make. We are at that existential apex. We have a choice. Are we going to continue on this path of self-servance, or are we going to open up our minds, open up our hearts, and recognize our connection with nature and with other people and start behaving appropriately? That's what it comes down to. And it is a choice that we'll all have to make.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad that I'm having this conversation with you because, like I said, it's not an easy conversation to have with many people because most people just want to go and talk about, like statistics and science and facts and whatever, but it is a bigger conversation. And yeah, it's been really consuming me for several years now. And so then it brings me to the next point, right? Because at some point I then also realized, okay, hang on. The reality is that most of us, right? Those of us who have kind of awoken, I just talk for myself. I was dragged by the hair through many years of suffering, right? And eventually getting to the point where my body just didn't function anymore. And and not just physiological, but also deep emotional, psycho-spiritual suffering. And so I was brought to my knees. It was like, okay, you need to wake up now. And, I always say by the grace of God, not really by any greatness of my own, I made the right choice in that moment. And I went into fasting and whatever. And that is what really brought this huge awakening for me to then see, oh my gosh, this is what we're doing. And at the same time, I kind of go, okay, well, Alex, that took you, 3-4 years of deep work, deep self-confrontation. I mean, it wasn't, a party. It was hard. It was difficult. It was challenging. Many times in between, I thought like, oh my gosh, will I even survive this? And so forth. And so then I think, how many people are ready to do this? Like most people, or I think for myself, would I have chosen this if somebody would have simply said to me, well, you have this lovely choice. I didn't have a choice. So for me, it was made easy in that sense. But many, then mind you, I feel most of my clients, I would still say, you don't really have a choice, but they still act as if they have a choice, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how do we drive this point home to people and make it more enticing to go on this journey and to go, okay, you know what? Yes, you are going to go on this journey of regenerating your body and detoxing. Well, and the other thing that always comes to my mind as well is most people, they don't want to look bad for not even a minute, right?
Right.
Like we all just want to always look like, ideally like supermodels, like Ken and Barbies and so forth. And the reality is that when you're going through regeneration and detoxification, sometimes things don't look so hot for a few years. And I certainly, can speak to that. Everything started to sag. My skin, I looked older 10 years ago as I was going through detox than I do now, right? And this is normal. But most people don't want to put up with that.
Right.
So what do we do?
So each of us can see that to some degree, we're not on the right path. We can feel that. We're not as happy as we know we could be. We're not as vibrant as we know we could be. We don't have the energy. The number one complaint at doctor's office is I don't have enough energy. Yet our
Yeah.
body is in a constant state of producing energy. That's pretty much its sole purpose, is to produce enough energy to keep the body running, right? And here we are saying we don't have enough. Why? Because we're stressing out too much. We're eating bad. We're not exercising, and we're not finding community. These all contribute to the ill health that most people are experiencing. So when you get to that level of experiencing ill health, you don't know, or you don't remember what feeling good actually felt like until you get it back.
That's it.
Now, how can we give that? So I traveled all over the world. I traveled to 48 different countries, working with all different types of groups, religious groups, spiritual groups, and asked them basically the same question: is how do you create a shift in people? How do you get people to move from where they're at in a mindset to a new way, opening their mind to looking at life, looking at their own life first, differently? How do you get them to feel more connected? So when I was doing a sweat lodge with Native American chief up in the hills of Maine, we did the sweat lodge, and I had this extraordinary experience, and it just brought me so much joy. But I realized the initiation of the experience was you go into it and you put the hot rocks down there, and then you pour water on it, which rapidly accelerates the temperature inside the thing, very fast. So this flash of heat comes over you, and then this flash of perspiration. So your body physiology changes really rapidly. And then my emotions started to shift. And then my mind started to shift. And then I had energetic shift. So I'm like, aha. So they just took one part of the human experience, the physical part of the human experience, and shifted it. But because we're whole beings, we're not just physical, we're emotional, we're psychological, we're spiritual or energetic. So you shift one part of the human being, the rest of it will want to come along with the ride, to bring you back into balance. So I'm like, oh, okay, well, there's a wonderful example. I said, okay, but most people aren't going to do a sweat lodge or, hang out with Buddhist monks and meditate or whatever. They're just not going to do this, not at least in America. Some will, but how did they get that? So I said, all right, how can we create a shift in people that's something that's tangible to them? That's something that's say, hey, I would like that. So I said, okay, physical fitness, right? Two things we do every day, almost everybody does every day, which is eat and move, right? It's food or nutrition and exercise. What if we could take the nutrition and ramp it up big time? Well, then could that cause a body experience that says, wow, this is what ideal nutrition feels like. This is what my cells all livened up feels like. If I can get people into the gym or doing regular exercise and teach them all the benefits, all the health benefits, even I'm a natural bodybuilding champion, natural physique champion, show them what a 61-year-old eating nothing but plants can look like, then maybe we'll have a conversation, right? So present it in a way that it's something that anybody could want, something that they could say, yeah, I want to look like that, or I want to feel like that, but give it to them in a way that is simple and easy. a nutritional drink or a fasting approach like that. Something that anybody can do, at least for a short period of time, to initiate that spark. My goal with that, with creating Clean Machine, which is this amazing machine we're born into, the human physiology, which is extraordinary, to keep it clean, to keep it natural, to keep it healthy, to give the body what it needs to do its thing well. There's some great research on long-term Buddhist monks who were chaste for 10, 20 years or more, no sexual activity. And they said, okay, well, what are their testes doing if they're not having sexual? Are they just going dormant? Are they losing their functionality altogether? So they did a radioactive tracer and found out that their testes actually stopped producing semen altogether because they weren't having sex. But instead, their testes started producing another chemical, and they traced that chemical, and it's going right to the brain, to the meditative centers of the brain. So when you change your habits, your body can start doing things that you never asked it to do before. It can start producing things. They took another study, and they took the adrenal gland, and they grafted it to the spinal cord to see what would happen. It sent opiate signals to the brain, and the human felt no pain whatsoever. Now, we know this can happen in extreme cases, like the woman lifting a 1,000-pound car off her child because that adrenaline burst, and she didn't feel any pain. So we know that parts of the body, especially the endocrine, the thyroid, the pituitary, the endocrine, all of it can function differently if we ask it to. And it's not until we make changes do we get to find out benefits that are laying dormant, that are waiting for us to say, you're not asking for that, so I'm not going to do it. How much of our brain could be turned on that we're not turning on because we're not asking of it to think at a higher level, to process at a higher level? We know that you can strike a point on the back of the head and almost everyone will become a musical savant or a mathematical savant. We know this. That's in everyone. So why aren't we mathematical geniuses? Why aren't we? Because we're not asking for that. Our brain has functionality we're not asking to because we're not challenging it to. Our body has functionality that is way beyond the things that we think it can do, but we never found it because we're not asking it to do that. We're not putting it in a situation. Okay, so DHA. Most people think, all right, our body doesn't convert ALA, the plant-based omega-3, to DHA sufficiently, right? So they looked at people who were non-vegetarian or vegan, just standard American diet, meat-based diet, and eating fish. And they said, you're right. That gene is not, it's called the ApoE4 gene or FADS2 gene, is not producing very much of the delta-6 desaturase, this first enzyme, the rate-limiting enzyme that converts ALA down eventually to DHA. So their assumption from that observation was nobody produces this enzyme enough. Wrong. When they looked at vegans who had a much higher intake but had no intake of preformed DHA, once they removed that from the diet, now that exact same FADS2 gene started up-ramping and producing much more of the enzyme because it needed more of the enzyme. So we were looking at the wrong population, not vegans, and we were looking at the enzyme producing low amounts because it didn't need to, because it was already being supplied with DHA from fish or from animal products. If you're getting it from your diet, your body says, well, I don't need to make the enzyme. Let's save that production of the enzyme. It's called the energy conservation principle of the physiology of the human body. The body won't make what it doesn't need because it's spending energy and spending resources, in this case proteins, on producing enzymes when it doesn't need it. So it only responds to the need. Once you are consuming only ALA, that conversion rate goes way up. And we saw the highest conversion rates of ALA to DHA was in vegans, much higher. we now know that you can take a DHA supplement and it will downregulate your body's ability to convert ALA. So if you're vegan and you're taking an algae DHA supplement, you're actually reducing your own body's ability to convert that ALA that's 90% of your omega-3 source into DHA. So you actually could be shrinking the amount of available DHA to you by taking a DHA algae supplement. And most people don't know this. It's challenging that we look at observation and make assumptions based on animal diets being the better diet. It's not. When we shift our view to, wait a minute, the human being for hundreds of thousands of years has been predominantly based on plants. We know this because we have data on the caprolites, which is the fossilized human poop. They took fossilized human poop from every major continent in the world, and every single sample they had, the poop contained 100 to 225 grams of fiber. Americans are currently consuming 10 to 15 grams of fiber a day. That was 100 to 200 grams in a single poop. That's how much plants they were eating. That if you ate 225 grams total for the day of fiber, you would have zero room for any animal product in your gut at all. And we see this on every single continent that human beings were doing that. Then we looked at oral microbiome. So our oral microbiome tells us what we're eating. If you eat starches, it'll produce a higher rate of starch-consuming bacteria in your mouth. That helps pre-digest the starches so you can get energy from it. Well, they took the fossilized jaw bones and looked at the teeth. And sure enough, they could take the DNA of the dead oral microbiome, and you could tell exactly what they were eating. And the number one most common oral microbiome was starch-eating bacteria. So they knew human beings for tens of thousands of years were eating predominantly, getting most of their calories from starch base. Starchy fruits, starchy vegetables, and starchy tubers. Why? Because that's where more glucose could come from. Starch has a much more condensed form of glucose, and that feeds our brain. That's how our brain, most people say, oh, we needed fats to feed our brain. No. Do you know how much DHA is required for the brain per day? 2 to 3.5 milligrams. Wow. Yeah, our body can store 50,000 milligrams in fat tissues. Fat does not feed the brain. Glucose feeds the brain. 20 to 25% of the glucose that we consume in an entire day goes directly to feed the brain. It is the single largest glucose-consuming organ on the planet, more than any other animal, more than any organ in any other animal. And that's how we got the big brains we do. And that's why our brains evolved mostly outside. It takes us 18 years to get to brain maturation. All of this is in the physiology. It's all there for us if we want to understand it. But if we hold on to these dogmas of you got to eat this keto diet or carnivore diet or whatever, it doesn't matter. Let's look at what humans actually ate, what our body physiology is designed to process, and why it's designed that specific way. Then the dogmas on all this dietary stuff just go away and you see the truth for what it is. The truth is our physiology. The truth is the way the nutrients are produced and how we utilize them. That's there, and it's always been there. Now we have new data. We have new techniques. They even took the Mediterranean. They took bones from all around the Mediterranean from thousands of years ago, tens of thousands of years ago, and they measured the bones. Now there's a new technique where they can measure carbon. So carbon has different forms from different sources. Like if you are eating fish, it has a very specific carbon signature, like a fingerprint. And you can see that fingerprint show up in the bone. So we can look at the bones and know exactly if they were eating plants or animals or fish. All of the Mediterranean samples showed they ate zero amount of fish. They didn't consume fish at all. And this whole Mediterranean diet based on fish is a made-up concept. That's what people
Wow.
eat in the Mediterranean diet now, but that's not the original Mediterranean diet. It was exclusively animals. They looked at the animal bones that they found there, and the animal bones had old bones. It's because they were using animal husbandry, captured animals like sheep and cows, to poop, so that they could use the poop for fertilizer for the plants. They were eating the plants, and the animal bones that they found there wasn't because they were eating them, because they all were aged and died of old age. They were there because they were a great fertilizer source. See how we
Wow.
misinterpreted? We saw, oh, all these animal bones of sheep and cows, that must have been what they're eating. No, they were using them as fertilizer to grow plants better. It's like, now we know this. We looked at the dentation, the teeth of the sheep, and they were all worn down. You could only do that by getting to an old age of the sheep. It means they didn't kill them, because you don't eat old sheep. The meat is all tough and bitter. You would never do that. You would kill it when it's young. But they weren't doing that. They were using the animals to feed the plants so that they could grow more crops. So,
Wow. This is such an eye-opening conversation. And yeah, I mean, I can only say everyone needs to hear this. Everyone needs to open their minds to this so that then we can take the correct steps. And as I always say also to my clients, it's not necessary to go radical, right? Because to be radical for a lot of people, it brings up issues and so forth. But when we begin to change our consciousness from the traditional idea that we need all of these animal products to be healthy to, well, hang on, actually, we have been degenerating ourselves for many generations. And what we actually need to do is we need to go back to the opposite. We need to really find our way back to more plants, and not just more plants, but really more of a natural lifestyle. And at this point, I kind of want to share, really a very ironic story of my own. We were living in South Africa for 17 years, where we had this beautiful lifestyle immersed in nature. Cape Town is one of the most magnificent cities, total nature bound everywhere. And then just before 2020, we thought, oh, let's move to Bali because we are, mostly fruit we were at that time. And, let's move into the jungle and let's live an even healthier lifestyle, right? Well, coming to Bali has been an absolute disaster for us. Why? Because Bali is anything but a beautiful, it's wonderful and amazing people and so forth, but it's anything but a healthy island. There's a lot of pollution, and let's also say we of European descent are not really made to live in the tropics. And so we're finding ourselves living indoors in air conditioning, and so we're so far away from nature. And needless to say, we're making our way back to South Africa. But these, and in some ways this whole exercise has really taught me and driven home how deeply we need nature, because we were living outdoors, year round pretty much before, and now we don't. And I can definitely feel the difference on all levels. Never mind the pollution that's going on here, etc. So yes, firsthand experience of how deeply we need this connection to nature all the time. And the reality is that, as you said, most people have never experienced it to begin with. Most people
yeah.
have never lived enough in a natural environment to know this is what it feels like. Never mind, they have never experienced what does true health and aliveness feel like in a body, and what does it feel like to the consciousness, because it's all intertwined. So before we finish off, and of course, we're going to have to do some other podcasts, maybe going more specifically into some genes, because there is so much to talk about the subject. And, again, I feel like it's so difficult for most people to really get to true information out there. We can look, there's so many websites out there, so much information, but most of it, and my experience is, we have to dig with effort to find the truth. A little bit of Google searching or looking at, the big guys out there, in terms of science and sort of medicine and development, you're only going to get mainstream stuff. You're only going to get the same story that is punted everywhere, and it's not the full story. So in closing, let's maybe touch upon this idea that, we need, because of course, especially in America, I mean, some of these doctors and functional practitioners, functional gurus out there, they're just punting protein. I mean, like literally they'll say, you need to eat protein like it's your business. Right? That's kind of like many people's lives, like just protein, eat a steak and work out and, you'll be flying. What do we say to that?
If you're talking about plant proteins,
okay, yeah.
That's not an issue. So amazing research actually delineated the two to see if higher intakes of protein was actually worse for people or if it caused any effects. And the results were pretty remarkable. At roughly around 200 grams of protein intake a day, which is very high. They found that those consuming animal protein at that levels had a 75% increased cause of all mortality, so cause of death, 400% increase in cancer rates, and a 500% increase in type 2 diabetes, the higher the animal protein. And when they looked at the plant protein at the same level, they found no correlations between any of those at all. As a matter of fact, the reduction of type 2 diabetes with the plant proteins. So it's not really technically the amount of protein, it's the amount of animal protein that's probably more concerning. And for all of your listeners out there, I want you to Google search one term: methionine-dependent cancer. So we now know in the scientific community, it's called the Hoffman effect. We now know that all cancers feed on methionine to accelerate their own growth. All right, so cancer cells, not so bad. Our body can usually take care of them, destroy them, apoptize them, kill them, take them out of the body and discard them. It's when they start growing too fast, our body can't keep up. That's called metastasization. When it metastasizes, starts to spread, that's when it becomes lethal. The vast majority of people who die from cancer have a metastasized growth. Okay, so what initiates this? Methionine is used to stimulate growth. That's why you see it in higher amounts in milk protein, for example, because a cow has to go from 60 pounds to 600 pounds. So you need a lot of cellular growth. Human beings don't change at all once we're past 18. So we don't need a lot of methionine. We don't need growth potentiators like that. So they put that to the test, and they found it pretty much across the board, not just in humans, but almost all species that were non-carnivores. But in humans and all other herbivores, they found the higher methionine led to shorter lifespans. Now you can look that up too, methionine and longevity. Just type that in and you'll see a whole bunch of studies. And the studies will even say, wait a minute, we use in oncology a methionine restricted diet in order to reduce the risk of cancer spread. So now when you go to a doctor, an oncologist who's treating you for cancer, many of them will recommend that you actually reduce your methionine intake. It's a known clinically proven strategy for doing it. What's the easiest way to reduce your methionine is to go onto a plant-based diet, because almost all plants are lower in methionine, with the exception of nuts. And don't make nuts your main food source and you're fine. But all the rest are lower in methionine. We used to think that because plant proteins were lower in methionine, that it was an incomplete protein. We now know lower methionine is better. And actually, the lower the methionine, the better. So again, we made these assumptions about iron. We made these assumptions about vitamin A. We made these assumptions about plant protein, that less was worse. We now know that less is better, that less has better health outcomes. For cancer, methionine feeds cancer cell growth. Every single cancer, lung cancer, breast cancer, pancreatic cancer, all of them feed on methionine. So the higher amounts of methionine you're consuming, which is why we see this 400% increase in cancer rates, and those consuming high amounts of animal proteins, because it's higher methionine. We see it in extending lifespan. And look from nematodes, which is small worms, all the way up to chimpanzees and humans. Lifespan is extended. You know, they originally said, hey, calorie reduction is a way to extend lifespan, right? Autophagy.
Mm-hmm.
You're very familiar with that, with fasting. And then they said, well, wait a minute, is it reducing calories or is it certain macronutrients? And they reduced the fat, they reduced the carbs. That didn't make any difference. But when they reduced the protein, yes, they saw the same thing as calorie restriction. So they said, it's the protein that's causing this. So then they said, well, wait a minute, is it the protein that's causing it? Because wait a minute, we still need protein, and higher protein does actually have health benefits to it. Well, that's weird. So then is it the amino acids? So sure enough, they isolated it down to the methionine, and that was the culprit for extending lifespan. It wasn't just the calories, although you can get life extension from calorie restriction, because if you restrict the calories, you're going to be restricting your methionine intake too. So you're getting both. It's the same thing. And when you restrict the protein, especially animal protein, you get the same. You're restricting methionine. Or you could simply eat a whole food plant-based diet and you'll naturally restrict the methionine and extend your lifespan. Obviously, you can get hit by a car or something else like that. But if nutritionally you want to, extend your life, I've always said we're all playing Russian roulette. But the question is, how many bullets do you want loaded in that gun before you play? Nothing will stop you from dying, but the more bullets you have in the gun means the sooner you could end up getting killed. I like playing my odds and doing things and making choices that extend not only my health, but my health span. I was at a raw food conference and they said, how can we get more people eating more raw foods? And I said, you assume they want to actually live longer. I said, that's where the flaw is. A lot of people are basically unhappy with their lives and want them to end. If you're in pain, what do you want to do? You want the pain to end. And I think subconsciously, on some level, not consciously, because healthy people don't think this way, but subconsciously, when we are not enjoying our lives, when we are not in good health, we kind of want it to be game over already, to get it over with. So we're making choices subconsciously that actually accelerate a shorter lifespan. We need to re-grab that and say, wait a minute, is that what I really want? How about let me find out what real health feels like? How about let me find out what living happily, living excited for the next day feels like? Maybe I'll think differently about that. But we need to get to that place mentally and emotionally first before some people are willing to say, yeah, I want to extend life. I want it because I'm enjoying my life, because I find life sacred, because I find life beautiful, that my experiences are worth staying here.
Absolutely. I think that's a big point. And as we said earlier, most people, unfortunately, have never had the experience of feeling good enough in their bodies. And, I can only attest to that until the age of 40, 42 or so. That was me as well, where I was like, I just don't get it. And when you don't get it and you don't see it reflected, right? Because how many people worldwide? I mean, yes, there's a lot of good looking people, but I always say just good looking doesn't mean good feeling.
That's true.
There's a big difference. And there was one last question that I wanted to ask, and now it's kind of gone. Yes, well, so yeah, maybe to just briefly address, because many people will say, oh, but I've tried plant-based, it didn't work for me, right? What do we want to say to those people?
Okay, so we have to understand symptomology and stimulation versus actual health. So you can take caffeine, right? And you'll feel a lot of energy. But is that really energy or is that stimulation? So caffeine actually forces your body to burn up your real energy. That's not true energy. That's putting your foot down on the gas pedal to go faster, yes, but you're actually using up the fuel that's in the gas tank. You burn through the fuel faster by using stimulants. Will it make you temporarily feel more energy? Yes, but you're actually using up more energy. So technically, nutritionally, you're depleting your energy when you use stimulants, not gaining energy. People say, oh, I get energy from coffee. No, you use energy from coffee at an accelerated rate. So I think there's this difference between people saying, hey, wait a minute, I switched to X diet and I felt better, but when I did a plant-based diet, I felt worse. And I'm like, awesome, you felt worse? And they're like, what? And I'm like, that's your body detoxifying. That's your body actually taking all these toxins that are stored in your fat, stored in your joints, and start pulling them out. And as they go into your bloodstream, they're going to travel around through your brain because all our blood goes to our brain, and it's going to make our brain feel a little discomfortable. It can give you headaches, can give you nausea. It can back up into the stomach. Those toxins, depending on how toxin you are, make you feel nauseous. It's not that it's not working for you. It is working for you. It's you're misinterpreting the signs that your body is going through. Once you understand the detox process, you can say, great, I see this is happening. Like if you get sick, you get a bacteria coming in, a bacteria and viruses are to help destroy bad cells. It's a process of autophagy. Our body needs to break down the poor functioning cells and get rid of them. Well, bacteria and viruses do that for us. This is a normal process. Most people have demonized bacteria and viruses because they kill people. No, they kill sick people because they're attacking all the dead cells, all these dysfunctional cells, and they're destroying too much because you've already weakened them through your diet, lack of exercise, and stress, and everything like that. They've found that those eating a healthy plant-based, whole food plant-based diet had up to 90+% higher chance of surviving COVID. And the number one cause of death was in those who had pre-existing conditions. This is an example of if you take care of your body and support your body, once you get bacteria, like I got bacteria from somebody coughing and sneezing on the plane, right? And I got sick. But I don't see it as sick. That's vitality. That's my body fighting back. And what happens is all those weak cells, all those deficient cells that weren't functioning got killed because they couldn't defend themselves. Great. This is a cleansing process. This is a way to get out those poorly functioning cells out of our body. So I actually don't mind getting sick because that's a cleansing process. And you can actually experience that from heavy detox. People feel like they're getting the flu. Their temperature goes up. The bacterial load goes up. The toxins are quitting the body. But once you're complete, as you know very well now, once you move through that, wow, you can experience health and vitality like you have never before.
Absolutely. That's a whole other podcast explaining how
Yes.
disease is, or, especially bacteria and viruses. It's like we really have got it the wrong way around. And yes, we should look forward to getting sick on a regular basis because it's a free detox.
Indeed.
Well,
Hormesis.
Geoff, yes, I mean, as always, I love your posts. I love the way you explain things. Why aren't we seeing people like you and I at all those longevity conferences? I mean, whenever I look at that, because, I'm interested in all the things. And I think, oh my gosh, this is all about medication. It's all about, which has its place, right? Like, would I put my 80-year-old mother-in-law on metformin and rapamycin? Yes, at that stage, I actually would. But if we're talking metformin, rapamycin, and all the gazillion other things about for longevity, at big longevity conferences, is like we're missing a big chunk.
Indeed. And again, that comes back to our thinking. We need to think from a connected place. We need, it's learning to, if you've ever read spiritual teachings from any of the books out there, there's interpreting things at its face value, and then there's seeing that same set of phrases or words in a whole different way because you are relating to it from an energetic place, from a connected place, from a I'm part of an entire system, a global system place. Once you put on that mindset, that thinking cap, you see words differently in the teachings. You're like, oh, that's what they're talking about, not the face value that most people say, are taking it from. And then things start to speak to you. If we can look at each other, if we can look at our place in nature, if we can look at our relationship with animals and the plants and the fungi and the bacteria as part of a system, you see a whole different picture. And it's until we see ourselves as not individual islands, all self-contained and self-sufficient. We're not. We're a walking planet. We're home to 40 trillion residents, right? Other organisms that are living both in us and on us. And we're a moving planet. We're their home. And they are working cooperatively. They help break down the food we eat by saying, thank you for feeding us in our gut. We're going to give you lots of cool metabolites and break down lots of nutrients for you, for your body to help you. Here's an interesting thing. When you work out, you squeeze out some lactic acid, right? Lactic acid from our muscle groups. Well, we got to get rid of that lactic acid. So what do? We dump it back into our digestive tract. And guess what? Lactobacillus, the number one most common bacteria in our gut, takes that, boom, takes that lactic acid, said, thanks for feeding me. In return, I'll make some short chain fatty acids, and that'll reduce the inflammation in your muscles. Our muscles do it. We feed them the waste. They say, great, thanks for the food. Here's your substrates to help you with your workout. Do you see that interconnectedness? That's where we need to get back to, seeing ourselves as part of a greater whole. When we do that, the pieces of the puzzle all fit together, and you'll know what is right. You won't have to guess or believe some influencer on YouTube. You'll see a system that is beautiful. It's inherent in every cell of every being on this planet.
Thank you, Geoff. If that was not inspiring, if that is not inspiring to the listeners to kind of go, wow. And that has been my message for so many years as well, to go, my God, like we are such perfect, inherently perfect beings. But if we are not in relationship with nature, if we are not in relationship with all that is good, right? Because all that is good, we are going to become wrapped up, as the world is, in all that is destructive and terrible. And, and hence, we live in this total chaos, which it doesn't have to be. So thank you so much, Geoff. We're definitely going to have more conversations like this. We have to bring you on probably a few times more, because there is so much that you can teach people. And then everyone can make their own choice in whatever degree fits their current lifestyle, because, it takes time to regenerate. Take the time. Who cares if it takes you 5 or 10 years? The point is, in 5 or 10 years, you're going to be better. That's the key. You can be better than you are today in 5 and 10 and 20 years down the line. Thank you for your time, Geoff. Really appreciate you. And by the way, I just wanted to mention, Geoff has some really, really great products in his range. My husband has been taking them, and, we haven't even talked about testosterone and all of that, but I do want to say my husband's testosterone levels were quite down. And when we started your supplements and, a few other things that I actually can't remember, but definitely your supplements were a big part of it. I don't even know which ones, but reach out to Geoff and he'll tell you what. My husband now at the age of 57 has 800 levels, around 800 testosterone. No TRT, and, on a predominantly plant-based diet. We were predominantly plant-based for many, many years, introduced a little bit of animal products here and there since living in Bali. And by the time we're back to South Africa, we want to go back to what we were doing because that is when we felt the best. So that's kind of just last little message. Thank you, Geoff. We will speak soon.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.